So it was a little bit challenging and stretching, as I mentioned earlier, to plan the VBS and then preach the week of. And a few weeks ago, before John went on vacation and asked if this day was okay, I'm like, yep, shouldn't be a problem. I've learned. So today, my message is called Tools and God. And I think I have a slide up there, but we shall see if it pops up. But life is ever-changing, as I'm sure many, or should all of us should know this. But going into a new season of life happens very, very often. And whether that is a kid going into a different grade every year until they graduate, or for adults, marriage, having kids, having grandkids, changing jobs, post-secondary schooling, and all the avenues and craziness that can come from that. Life is ever changing. So, when it is changing, I hid something. We need to rely on the tools in our toolbox. Now, tools, they come in all shapes and sizes. Whether it is tools that you've grown up with, things that have been drilled into you since you were very young. This hammer was my great-grandfather's. Pretty old hammer, and still reliable. It has some chunks taken out of it, but that's just when you use tools. Some are pretty fancy. If I can find it. Oh, there it is. Got this stud detector. Works. No, it's just batteries dying. No, my dad told me, he gave me, I borrowed a lot of these from my dad, and he told me I had to say that joke. So some are smaller, and some are very similar, but have very different purposes. Well, maybe different purposes, but they are specialized. If you try and use the same screws for both of these screwdrivers, it's not going to work. They are very, very close, but they have some differences. Some are heavy duty. Can't pick up a drill and not do that. Some are given, like this tape measure was a Christmas gift, I believe, from one of my aunts. And some are earned. I worked construction one summer during high school, and I bought this. It's a nail ripper with my own money. I bought it to have a tool that I owned. Some, I didn't bring them, but some are ones that you carry with you whenever you're on a job, such as steel-toe boots or a hard hat if you're on a construction site, work gloves, safety glasses, things that have a purpose, and when you're on a job site, you have with you all the time. Just like physical tools like these, we have our own physical skills, mental, emotional, and spiritual tools that we learn to use as we grow up. I have grown immensely in some of those areas over the last few years. And some of that is just from schooling and growing up with my family, and some are just from experience, such as my experiences here. When we are going into new seasons, we will use these tools very, very often. But there are pitfalls within that can get us into trouble, such as relying only on the tools that we have. If you only have a hammer, every problem starts to look like a nail. It's not a great way to live life. Sometimes, if maybe you don't have the heavy duty, sometimes you only have the screwdriver. If you don't have a screwdriver, then you either need to learn, or AKA buy a screwdriver, or you need to borrow and get a screwdriver from somebody else. Now, this is the first time that I solo prepared a VBS. And Danae, the amazing person that she is, took on like 75% of the planning and preparation and all of that last year. And oh boy, it's a lot of work. And this is only half days, let alone the full days and the pool and all the stuff that was planned last year. So major respect to her within that. But this is my first time doing it solo. And as I mentioned, it has been very stretching. However, Of most of the mistakes that I made, the biggest one, like as I planned and realized my mistakes and, I got to change this, I realized I was relying on myself too much. It's great to be self-sufficient. It's very important to be self-sufficient. But when there are people around you that can help you and you don't go to them, that's where you get in trouble. And that's why it's important. When you don't have a screwdriver and you need to deal with a screw, don't just use the hammer that you have. Borrow your screwdriver from your friend, or go, if you can, go and buy one. But it's hard to buy time, and that's what I was kind of running out of. So, growing up, my dad is a tinkerer, he's a builder, he's a renovator. That's how he is. When my parents first moved into their first place, he tore apart their bathroom in their first week of living there, to my mom's ire. Go on a couple more years, my family has moved to Regina. I am just a little kid. My dad's building a fence. I'm beside him, playing with blocks and knocking them with a hammer. I happen to smash my thumb into the concrete with that said hammer, but that's besides the point. And then that continued on. He's building a deck, and I'm able to go back and forth as I'm older and bring him tools that he needs. Then it continues to grow. I'm a little bit older. He's doing some roofing. I'm on the roof with him learning how a nail gun works. And it keeps going and it keeps going as he is not only mentoring me and helping me grow, but he is also able to get help. He has trained his own little minion or his own little sidekick to help him build. The same has happened with my brother. Since I'm no longer living at the house, I'm no longer the go-to guy for helping Dad make some things, but he's helped my dad make a wood storage near our fire pit and a garage storage shelf to help him organize his tools. It's fantastic. My dad and my brother and my dad and me have partnered up a lot. But if he didn't put in the work to help me grow, I probably would have been a lot less helpful. And when I was growing, I was probably not very helpful. But people come alongside you and they help you develop the tools that you need. The second big mistake, and honestly the biggest mistake that I make, was being apathetic. Not refusing it, but being apathetic to God's work within my work. Big mistake in ministry. I wasn't being as prayerful as I should have. I wasn't trying to listen to God's guidance and help through this VBS prep as I should have. I was getting stuck in the processes, in what needed to be done, and I got lost. God takes what little we have and makes it have a massive impact. I was trying to use this little nail ripper to deal with, at Rona, I didn't buy one for this example, but we have nails about this long and about this thick. I don't even think this could even do anything to that if it's hammered all the way in. But if I have the equivalent of this, God has this. It's a little bit more impactful. And if I'm stuck trying to use this little thing for such a massive problem, I could probably eventually get it out. Dig in a little bit, pry, dig in, pry. Oh, it's getting too much. Jerry-rig something out of blocks to get more leverage. It gets psychotic, honestly. You're looking at somebody with this weird amalgamation of boards, bits, and bobs, and using a tiny tool to get this massive spike out of the ground, when this was beside them all the time. They were just too blind to see that it was right beside them. It can be, these little things that turn massive, they can be physical things. In Matthew 14, 13 to 21, the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000. It's a little bit smaller than I thought it was going to be, so apologies. So starting at verse 13, as soon as Jesus heard the news, he left in a boat to a remote area to be alone, but the crowd heard where he was headed and followed on foot from many towns. Jesus saw the huge crowd as he stepped from the boat, and he had compassion on them and healed their sick. That evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a remote place, and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the villages to buy food for themselves." But Jesus said, "That isn't necessary. You feed them." "But we have only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish," they answered. "Bring them here," he said. Then he told the people to sit down on the grass. Jesus took the 5 loaves and 2 fish, looked up toward heaven, and blessed them. Then breaking the loaves into pieces, he gave the bread to the disciples, who distributed it to the people. They all ate as much as they wanted, and afterwards the disciples picked up 12 baskets of leftovers. About 5,000 men were fed that day, in addition to all the women and children. Loaves back then, as I was doing a little bit of research into it, probably weren't like the big old loaves that we were thinking. A lot of people think that the loaves are like little dinner rolls. So even less bread. Like a loaf, 5 loaves, you think you can make at least a few sandwiches for some people. Make enough lunches for 30, 40 people. But honestly, it's just the equivalent of a small lunch for a kid. And yet, God took what that little was and made it enough. And for us, as we go to our day-to-day, if we don't necessarily have enough energy, enough time, enough finances to do what we feel that God is calling us to do, what little we have can cascade into a lot more than is needed. Because it didn't just say that Jesus made enough to perfectly feed everybody. Not a crumb was left, but everyone was satisfied. No. 12 baskets full of extra. That's insane. It makes me think of the decorations. Like, we're getting to the end of the decorations, and we have a little mountain of decorations that we can't use because there's not really any room, and we're kind of running out of time. More than enough was given. But it can also be amount of people. Again, I'm thinking of the VBS. So this is in Judges 5, 2-7. The Lord said to Gideon, "You have too many warriors with you. If I let all of you fight the Midianites, the Israelites will boast to me, saying that they saved themselves by their own strength. Therefore tell the people, whoever is timid or afraid may leave this mountain and go home." So 22,000 of them went home, leaving only 10,000 who were willing to fight. But the Lord told Gideon, "There are still too many. Bring them down to the spring, and I will test them to determine who will go with you and who will not." When Gideon took his warriors down to the water, the Lord told him, "Divide the men into 2 groups. In one group, put all of those who cup water in their hands and lap it up with their tongues like dogs. In the other group, put all those who kneel down and drink with their mouths in the stream." Only 300 of the men drank from their hands. All the others got down on their knees and drank with their mouths in the stream. The Lord told Gideon, "With these 300 men, I will rescue you and give you victory over the Midianites. Send all the others home." Now, I'm not saying that the Lord gave me 1,000 individuals wanting to help out with the VBS, and God's like, no. That's just not how kids ministry works. That was a joke. I'm not trying to shame anybody. But it is an example that, is 300 people enough to take on an army of thousands? Human strength-wise, not in a million years. But to God, it is possible. So whether it is not enough people to help with a specific ministry in a church, or out there as you're living life, if you're working for God and you don't think you're enough as an individual, God covers the rest. And finally, it can be our skills. If we don't think we have enough skill to do something, God can cover that. And coincidentally, was not planned. We look to David and the Goliath. So 1 Samuel 17, 32-49. "Don't worry about this Philistine," David told Saul. "I'll go fight him." "Don't be ridiculous," Saul replied. "There's no way you can fight this Philistine and possibly win. You're only a boy, and he's been a man of war since his youth." But David persisted. "I have been taking care of my father's sheep and goats," he said. "When a lion or a bear comes to steal a lamb from the flock, I go after it with a club and rescue the lamb from its mouth. If the animal turns on me, I catch it by its jaws and club it to death. I have done this to both lions and bears. And I'll do it to this pagan Philistine too, for he has defied the armies of the living God. The armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the claws of the lion and the bear will rescue me from this Philistine." Saul finally consented. "All right, go ahead," he said, "and may the Lord be with you." Then Saul gave David his own armor, a bronze helmet and a coat of mail. David put it on, strapped the sword over it, and he took a step or two to see what it was like, for he had never worn such things before. "I can't go in these," he protested to Saul. "I'm not used to them." So David took them all off again. He picked up 5 smooth stones from a stream and put them into his shepherd's bag. Then, armed only with a shepherd's staff and a sling, he started across the valley to fight the Philistine. Goliath walked out toward David with his shield bearer ahead of him, sneering in contempt at this ruddy-faced boy. "Am I a dog," he roared at David, "that you come at me with a stick?" And he cursed David by the names of his gods. "Come over here, and I'll give your flesh to the birds and wild animals," Goliath yelled. David replied to the Philistine, "You come to me with sword, spear, and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of heaven's armies, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. Today the Lord will conquer you, and I will kill you and cut off your head, and then I will give the dead bodies of your men to the birds and wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. And everyone assembled here will know that the Lord rescues his people, but not with sword and spear. This is the Lord's battle, and he will give you to us." As Goliath moved closer to attack, David quickly ran out to meet him. Reaching into his shepherd's bag and taking out a stone, he hurled it with his sling and hit the Philistine in the forehead. The stone sank in, and Goliath stumbled and fell face down to the ground. A violent story for sure. And you will not be fighting people to the death in your day-to-day lives. But God grows skills within us. David wasn't just fresh from the field, having no difficulties at all, and just walking out and fighting this Philistine for his first fight. There were troubled times in David's life. He had to defend his flock from lions and bears. I'm sorry. A creature that is like 5 foot tall at the back, with razor-sharp claws and razor-sharp jaws, who I would rather die than fight, because I'm going to die anyways. And this 12-year-old kid is fighting them off with a stick. And, I think God might have been involved. God not only grows those skills, but when it really matters, God helps those skills be enough. David was ready for 5 stones. He didn't just grab a single rock going, "Yep, this will be enough." He grabbed 5. He was fully expecting it to miss or for the first one to not be effective, or he was ready. Maybe not expecting, but he was ready for that to be the case. And yet the very first stone was more than enough as this giant man crumbled to the ground in front of a 12-year-old kid. Again, we do not fight death battles every day. But when we come across challenges, when we come across problems, it can feel like a death battle, not with another human being, but with the pile of work in front of you. I just referenced it quite a bit, but the most important tool in our toolbox is this. It's also the most versatile. Not necessarily physically. I'm not going to use the Bible to smash in a nail or unscrew a screw. But it is one that covers so many areas of our mental, emotional, spiritual, and even physical health and well-being that unless we know and continue to learn from this, you're going to make the same mistakes I did and try and go it on your own without people, or go it on your own, even worse, without God. With God, what we have is enough. With God, we are able to grow, gain more tools, and better use the tools that we have. Amen. Ministry is more than coming to church, more than helping out with a VBS or listening to worship music. Ministry is using the tools and the skills, the passions that we have, that the Lord has given us to serve the Lord to the best of our abilities. It can be spiritual tools, like the Bible. But it can be physical tools, like a hammer. Jesus was a carpenter. Or mental and emotional tools that you can learn, you can use to help others around you. But what we have is enough for God to work. That doesn't mean don't get better. Continue to train those skills, better use those skills or tools. I'm pretty decent with a hammer. I don't miss the nail very much. But the guys I worked on that construction crew with, long, 3-4 inch nail, hooked it to their hammer, 1, 2, it was in. They are skilled at their craft. Just like that, we can improve. But it doesn't need to be in a church. If you love math, use those math skills. If you're a skilled tradesman, like carpentry or electrician or a plumber, use your skills there. If you enjoy computer coding, use those skills. If you have a call to serve in ministry, if you have a passion about sports, use those gifts to serve God. God has given you those gifts. I like to think I'm a decent drummer. So I use those gifts to the best of my ability to worship the Lord. I thought I was going to be a terrible speaker when I was in high school. Hated the public speaking projects. But God has trained up that skill that I like to think I'm pretty decent. No, that wasn't for applause. That was just, yeah. But those skills in our lives, those passions, those abilities, we need to use them to serve God. And when we rely on God, He covers the rest. Now I'm going to invite the worship team to come up. And while they come up, I apologize so much. That is a Christian lingo that I kind of forgot I need to explain. It is a vacation Bible school. Basically, we have probably about 40 now, maybe a bit more, kids that come here for a period of time. We teach them about Jesus. We do fun activities with them, and then send them back to their parents every day. So if we do that for 5 days, it's exhausting, but it is very, very awesome. Anyway, so while the worship team comes up, I will close in prayer. God, just want to thank you so much for this day and this time. Thank you for the abilities and the skills and the passions that you have given us. Thank you for the opportunities that you give us, whether fun and enjoyable or not so fun and a little bit stressful, but the opportunities you give us to grow those skills. And God, I don't know if what I've said has done anything, but you are more than enough to cover any gap. So God, I just pray that in our own lives, whether it is in a church, if it's out on a construction yard, if it's out in work, or if it's in a home, that you continue to grow skills and abilities, you continue to cover that gap, that when we're not enough, you are more than enough. So God, I just want to thank you so much for the privilege of serving you, the privilege of learning from you, and the privilege of life that you have given us. So thank you, Lord, for this day and this time. Thank you for this amazing group of people that I get the privilege to serve. And thank you for all you do.